Welcome to today's podcast, sponsored by Hauser's Dover Apothecary, hausershealthcare.com. Hi, Barb. It's the November show with Barb from Healthy, Well, and Wise. Your story this month for the October Hub. When I read it, I started to laugh a little bit because last week I was doing some work up where I store my wood, and I had a bucket, believe it or not, and I was moving water, and the thing was just there was holes everywhere. I didn't really realize it. So you get almost to where you want to do, and there's like a third of the pail left.
Yeah.
And then I read your column for this month's Hub, and I started to laugh because it so made sense. And I'm just going to let you take it from here on the bucket story. How's that?
Sounds great, Dave. It's great to see you. And I use a lot of analogies that hopefully people can identify with. But it's life in context of us having buckets and what we can handle and not handle and the way they can spill over because, there's times in our life where one facet is going very, very smoothly. And oftentimes another area of life that we're sort of leaning into because that's our thinking space and we can try and work through problems in our head in that space. But then if that starts to erupt and things are going wrong on that end, so perhaps what you do in your workspace, that is an outlet for you. There's creativity, there's social support, there are, all these different aspects that are feeding into you and filling that bucket. But then, your home life, maybe you're caring for an aging parent and you've got children and that whole sandwich thing, and maybe somebody's, not well. And so there's things, being drained from you in that respect, but you've been leaning into this space because that helps lift you up. And then suddenly things aren't good in that space. Maybe you've got a new boss, maybe, the variables are endless that way. So that continuum between those two spaces starts to be very disrupted, and that bucket can start to spill over because you're trying to cram too many things in. And it's still a 24-hour day, and we're still just human beings, and we all have different levels of resiliency and resourcefulness that, once that starts to wear thin because maybe we're not eating properly, when our sleep starts to get disrupted, that dysregulates almost everything in our bodies. Maybe you're not finding or making the time for physical activity, which that boosts the endorphins in your body. We need to get out in nature. We have to prioritize different aspects of self-care, because if we don't, and there are things that are pulling from too many, it's like somebody's taking shots at your bucket from the distance and your water's starting to leak that way. And maybe you've just kicked it over yourself because you're just at your wit's end. But there are so many variables, and we need to be able to nurture the bucket itself and be sure that it's at the right level that we can carry everything that's in it.
When you try to prioritize, as an individual, you try to prioritize your problems or sort of put them in order to work on them. Is that where we get into trouble? Because like you just said, we overemphasize one area and we probably overthink it. In a lot of cases, we go to the worst case scenario, and we probably need to just sort of step back, reevaluate, and maybe find, I'm going to use this word, that life balance again, right? To sort of see where we can take it. But when you're overwhelmed, it's hard to see what you need to do.
Yes. And when we get to that sort of level, one of the exercises I often recommend to people is to take a picture of somebody that they love dearly, put it in front of them, put it on their mirror, just have it front and center so that they're actually looking at it, and talk through that problem with the person as if it's their problem. Okay, so you're separating on a certain level. How would you talk to them? What comfort would you give them? What things, what recommendations, where do you see that they could help rebalance themselves in this and lift themselves up. Because if you're thinking just of yourself in this respect, you're probably beating yourself up. What's wrong with me? Why can't I handle this? And you're not thinking through to find a solution in the same way that you would if it's a third party that you're helping through this. So that little bit of separation, you're not avoiding in any way. You're actually addressing it, but it's in a way that might be a lot more constructive to you. Think through things out in nature, right? Go for a walk and think through. If you're in motion constantly here, but your body isn't going anywhere. Some people can't think things through in that regard. So that walk in nature where there are other gentle distractions, the feel of the breeze, the sound of the birds, the smell of the air, just the whole energy of the space is helping you. Set an alarm. Okay. If you're a worrier, set an alarm. This is my time and space that I'm allowed to think about this problem, because some of our problems are ongoing. They're not something we can solve immediately, but they still are something that we stress over. So there are, but nutritionally, we have to make sure that the cells of our bodies are being fueled. If we're running out of gas at the cellular level, because the substances and foods that we're putting in ourselves aren't allowing us to nurture ourselves, what do you expect to come out, right? It just doesn't, there's no balance there. So it's many different aspects. People can be isolated. People may have been very spiritually connected, but they're not following those practices. Perhaps you like to meditate, perhaps you enjoy. So we have to make sure that we hold on to and make space and time for the things that we understand do bring us pleasure. And it doesn't have to be an hour, it doesn't have to be 2 hours, but we need to make that practice, even if you start back with just 5 minutes into those things that bring you joy and bring you pleasure, because that can be that gentle thinking space as we try to figure out the areas that are more complicated or that have ended up, converging with one another. And yeah, it's not easy, and it does take discipline. It's not, we talked last month about, not so much change, but adaptation. And so all of these things are a part of that balance, but recognizing in the first place, is my bucket too full? And can I say no? But that often comes with having those lists. Okay, so we look at the positives, we look at the things that fill us up and are assisting us, and then we look at the things that we feel are challenging us on the other side, and then we get to put them in order of their priority. And oftentimes it's something not that significant that's taking up the most real estate here.
Yeah.
So when we take that step and, take that little bit of time to do that, it helps us get some perspective back.
One thing I always think too, and I think this speaks to you because you don't want your bucket too empty, you don't want it too full, but a healthy routine daily. Like I know you're going to do this walk at noon with your dog. You know you're going to take these vitamins at 7. You know you're going to be in bed by 9. Like all those little steps, they're just, you can check off and make that part of your day. And I'm asking because I think for me that works. That's kind of the way I have to set things out for myself to make sure that I stay within those parameters, because then I'm getting my eats, my proper diet, my health, my exercise, and my sleep. And I think it boils down to, I find for me, and I know you're a big proponent of this as well, those 3 factors are it. If I can keep those things going at a steady pace, everything else can fit in there. You know what I mean? And work its way along. It's when things go off the rails, maybe where you miss a week of working out, or your body starts to change again. You have to readapt. But I think if I could give one piece of advice to anybody, it's like, get a healthy routine and stick to it, because that's going to make such a big difference. And you see it with your clients, I know, all the time, because you preach this as well.
Yeah. And it is the foundation, right? Everything else is built from there.
Yep.
So if, those factors of your life aren't solid and, really, really concentrated on, then everything else is going to be off balance from there. And a lot of people aren't aware that, something like a good B complex vitamin,
Yeah.
it literally is what feeds your central nervous system. And they're water soluble nutrients. So when we're under what we perceive as extra stress, those are the things that your body is burning through them. Okay. It's like putting kindling on a fire as opposed to a substantial log of maple that is a good hard solid wood that's going to burn for a while.
Yeah.
And so, if all those foundational things are looked after, you do have more resiliency. You know,
Yeah.
you think of anything, any structure that you're trying to build, and if you're trying to build it on something this big as opposed to something this big, try knocking over a pyramid as opposed to it just we have to think of our bodies as that foundation, our habits as those routines are, they should be non-negotiable. And, it's when people are in a situation where perhaps they have extraneous circumstances like finances. Maybe they've lost a job, maybe they've lost a spouse. Like there's so many different variables that can shake that a little bit more.
Yeah.
you know, it gets to be something that's less easy to find equilibrium again. But
Yeah.
that's where, and I talk about that in the article, is having a list of people that are our people and having that before you're in any form of a crisis. And that's your gratitude list. That's your list of professionals. That's the people that you can lean on when you're having those wobbles, when that bucket is spilling over or full of holes or rusting out at the bottom. It's isolation is as bad as overstimulation,
Yeah.
right? And it's just finding that balance point, knowing who you are. And so many people nowadays have lost touch with who they are, with what lights them up, with the very things, we talked about that before we got on this podcast about as kids, we lay in the grass and look up at the clouds and, the summer days just seemed like they'd go on forever, but there was so much grounding and in a literal sense, because as soon as you're in that space of nature, that grounding is going on because the energy's all different. If we're surrounded by all of the devices and social media and all of, the radio's going and this is going and that's going, that energy is not a healthy energy for any of us. And so finding those other elements, I love seeing my grandkids when they get to go to their cottage because it's not even like they're the same people. And you see that calm settle over them and the pleasure that they can take watching a loon on a lake or listening to it or, being out on the boat or the paddleboard. And it's just, they get it because they see the contrast.
Yeah.
Because when they go home, it's sports, it's school, it's this, it's that. And suddenly there's a disconnect from themselves. But in those spaces, even they, at a very young age, recognize who they can be and who they are and what they're connected to.
Cool. How do people get a hold of you so that they can keep their bucket at the right level?
Okay. So I have a home office and it's in Simcoe. It can reach me by phone. It's 519-410-3544. And so you can text. It may go to voicemail if I'm with a client. There's my website. People can also book through my website. It's healthywellandwise.ca. Or there's email, barb@healthywellandwise.ca.
Thanks for doing this. Really great topic today, and I hope folks look forward to reading your article in the Hub this month for the October Hub. Take care. Thanks for doing this.
Thanks, Dave.
Thank you for watching today. Our podcast was brought to you by Hauser's Dover Apothecary, hauserhealthcare.com.